Sara, what are you making of these dramatic moves in wheat, corn, some of the ags, and whether or not it's panic too far, too fast, or indeed we will see these sort of supply shocks from your perspective?
Yeah, I think the first thing we're just witnessing is what we should expect, which is a lot of volatility, right? As people try to sort of make sense of the news, you'll see sort of both sides of sort of the moves, whether it's to the upside, which was yesterday in the wheat markets, or the downside today, where it's down 8%. You'll see sort of that extreme volatility, and that's something we should continue to expect, right? But taking a step back and looking at sort of the fundamentals of sort of commodity markets, where both Russia and Ukraine play sort of a dominant role. You'll start with wheat, where they provide about a third of global exports and produce about 15% of the global production, or something like sunflower oil, where they provide about over 70% of exports globally, where they have huge sort of dominance. Fertilizer markets, which are tied to natural gas and are up quite a bit year on year already. Some of this pullback in price you're seeing is after a record rally over the past year and a half, not just in the last sort of week or two, right? So I think from a fundamental standpoint, if you look at wheat, we're at all-time, essentially from a stock standpoint at lows of over a decade in terms of stockpiles. So sensitive times.
I'm curious about the flow of existing inventory that may have already been ready either to load or had already been loaded on container ships, as well as any sort of potential inventory that may be coming down the pipeline with the harvest that we're expecting in a couple of months here. Is there a sense here that the volume could potentially still be the same, but where that grain, where that energy and oil ends up could be in different places than what it would normally have been?
Yes, I think that's a very good point. First of all, there is an upcoming harvest, and our machine learning based yield forecast models indicate that it will be a healthy harvest, and actually quite a good year for production of wheat, both in Russia and Ukraine, and so therefore it's going to have to find a home. And if you look at what happened in 2014, where markets had reacted very sort of aggressively to the upside, all retreated when that flowed into sort of global markets regardless. If you look at where most Russian and Ukrainian wheat goes today, it's to the Middle East. Middle East is one of the largest buyers. Middle East and Northern Africa are one of the largest buyers of wheat from that region. And the Middle East and North Africa are experiencing droughts that are sort of at their worst levels in over 20 years, according to our drought index. And so, it's going to need a home. There's demand for it. Supply and demand balances, markets are tight. And so really, what are we, where does this go will be a question asked. Let's not also forget that China did remove its import ban on Russian wheat. So that's another sort of new home for these grains.
Yeah.
Sara, I'd like to talk a little bit about the longer-term sort of supply chain impacts of this. If you think about prices today being as high as they are and sustaining at high levels today, at what point do we see that hit grocery store shelves? Is that second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter? Because there is this prevailing assumption that inflation is actually in the process of peaking. But if we've got this much inflation on the ground in prices of raw commodities, at what point can we see that inflation feed through the system?
It's a really good question you're asking, and really a question we're being asked by a lot of our corporate customers who are obviously worried about margins and margin compression in their businesses. And if you see what's happened in sort of the last 2 years, even though you've had drastic price increases, they haven't actually passed on that cost to the consumer as fast as sort of normally would happen, because they've had a lot of demand growth. And so what everybody's really worried about right now is, at what point are prices too high such that I see demand retreating in a high price environment and a very sort of low margin business, right? And so that's really the thing to sort of look at, is the combination and the confluence of all those things from a fundamental standpoint and from a longer term standpoint. To your point, the last 2 years have been unprecedented on the ag side, largely because you're seeing a combination of extreme supply side shocks and demand side shocks happening at the same time, which is sort of driving the prices. So it's not speculative in nature, it's actually very fundamental. And some of these are real structural shifts that we're seeing.